Our book, Polarity Intelligence, The Missing Logic in Leadership, is available for purchase in bookstores everywhere. Polarity is a universal law. It can't be avoided. It's like gravity. It's all around us in our homes, our work environments, our communities, and our countries. If you misdiagnose a polarity as a problem, you can be left trying to solve the same issue over and over, never finding a sustainable solution. That's why polarity intelligence is an essential competency leaders can't afford to overlook. Having this awareness and knowledge compels us to share it with leaders like you around the world. Start your journey toward becoming polarity intelligent today. Get your copy of Polarity Intelligence, The Missing Logic in Leadership wherever you get your books. This is a True Leader podcast. Today, we're going to share how to look at the hybrid work environment through a polarity intelligence perspective. So stay tuned. Welcome to the True Leader podcast. I'm Dr. Tracy Christofferson.
And I'm Michelle Trosett.
We are life and business besties, leadership coaches and mentors, and polarity intelligence experts. We're the authors of Polarity Intelligence, The Missing Logic in Leadership, and co-founders of Missing Logic.
We are here to help high-achieving leaders break through leadership norms that cause them suffering at work and home. If you're looking to elevate your leadership, increasing your productivity, effectiveness, and impact, and manage your health and well-being, spend quality time with those you love, and live your best life, then you are in the right place.
Our goal in this podcast is to equip you with new ways of thinking and practical and tactical strategies for succeeding at work and thriving in life. Think of this podcast as your weekly dose of personal and professional development so you can reach your full leadership potential, create a life you love, and be what we are calling a thriving, resilient, and unstoppable or true leader.
If you are ready to learn and laugh a little, let's get started. Hey, it's Michelle and Tracy back for another episode of the True Leader podcast.
Hello. Here we are. In the studio.
Talking about another very important topic for leaders today.
Well, something we live all the time.
Yes.
Being hybrid or working in a hybrid office or working remote, whatever you want to call it.
Or person-to-person studio time.
Yeah.
We're not hybrid today, people.
No, we're face-to-face today. Face-to-face today. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It is important because it really is becoming the norm, right? The hybrid work environment where maybe you work remotely, most of the time, but you do spend time in the office for most people. There's a lot of varieties of this, I think. I don't know that it's really...
There's no one set way.
No, because I think every organization's kind of doing what's working for them.
Mm-hmm.
But it is causing a stir out there, right? It is causing a stir. And the reason we're talking about it is... We read an article, and Gallup wrote this article about 6 workplace trends leaders should watch in 2024. Of course, we're interested in trends and workplaces and for leaders, right? And we'll put a link in the show notes. But 2 out of those 6 were related to hybrid work environments or the hybrid office. And so we wanted to talk about that. And one of the trends was organizations need a long-term hybrid work strategy, and the other was hybrid culture can be great if it's done right.
Yes.
And so, those comments or those trends came from an article that was also written by Gallup, which was The Future of the Office Has Arrived, and it's hybrid. And we'll put that link in the show notes as well. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today came from this article, and it just stimulated our thinking about hybrid work environments and our experience with that and how polarities show up in these environments. And how, since this is becoming the norm, it seems like it would be a good topic to talk about.
Yeah.
I think so. And, really the boom in hybrid work started with COVID.
Yes.
When people had to work, but they couldn't be in the office together. And that really, it was happening before that, but it really stimulated it, right? So it really pushed it out into the norm, I think. It was
Put it on steroids.
It did. It did.
Hybrid overnight.
I've been working remote since 2000. Like I was the first remote employee in the company that we worked in.
Uh-huh.
And I moved to Arizona and was hired to do remote work. And I was the first one, and it was painful. It was. Well, because people didn't know what to do with it. We didn't have Zoom. We had telephones. That was it, right? And you get on a conference call, and it seemed like you could never get your voice heard, right? You had to pretty much just wait for one moment of silence to go, hey, I have something to say, right? And people tried to be aware of that, right? They tried to be respectful of that. But, when you're sitting, and I would do the same thing when you're sitting around the table, you're seeing each other, you're engaged with each other, right? And so it wasn't intentional, but it really forced us as a company to be more intentional about how we were engaging with each other. And it brought an awareness that I think wasn't there before because we had never had the experience.
We didn't know.
Yeah.
I remember we even went so far as putting your picture on the conference room table. Tracy is here.
Yeah, so let's not forget, right? Because not without Zoom or without video conferencing, you couldn't see the person, and you'd almost forget the phone was there and on. Because you get engaged in dialogue and conversation, right? And it was great, but it was a little bit of a struggle, so I can relate. And we work totally remote for the most part, you and I now.
Oh, yeah.
And our team, right?
Yeah.
And we come together periodically, but most of the time we're not working with each other. So we've learned a few things about that. We'll share later.
We've come a long way, baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a hot topic, and people and organizations are still trying to strike that right balance, you might want to say. So, of course, Tracy and we're going to put a polarity intelligence lens on it because that's what we do. And actually, this is a perfect thing to do. Put a polarity intelligence lens during this time where organizations are still trying to find that right balance and, find just the best way. I love that article. It's good. It's here if you do it right. So we're going to have some conversation about that today. So if this new hybrid work environment is going to provide sustainable positive outcomes, it's essential that those leading in these environments are polarity intelligent and that they're aware of the polarities that they're going to be engaging with and leveraging healthy relationships and dialogue to optimize the experience for all at the individual level, the team level, and the organizational level. So that they can achieve sustainable results. Now, the challenge through this lens is not how to work and lead in hybrid environments, but how to establish a culture of polarity intelligence to achieve the greater purpose of the hybrid environment while serving individual and organizational needs.
Yeah. So I think that's key.
It is key.
That's a key statement, right? It's about recognizing and understanding the polarities because they're everywhere and they're inherent in this situation. And if you don't leverage them, and the only way to leverage them is to engage in meaningful dialogue and leverage healthy relationships, then you're going to use your superpower of problem solving and you're going to end up in the downside of one pole, right, or the other.
Yeah.
And I think that's already showing up in some regards, and we'll talk about that in different ways and what's pushing the buttons of leaders and organizations when people want to work hybrid.
Yeah, so the first step in optimizing the hybrid work environment is to adopt this polarity mindset that Tracy was just talking about and to recognize that there are polarities at play. They're always there, always will be, and to differentiate them from problems. Leaders are experiencing probably at the highest level when we sit back and ask ourselves, what's the major polarity at play here? It is tradition and innovation because we're breaking the mold of how we've always gone to the work environment. We've always done it this way. And so it's really looking at the tradition, innovation, polarity, and attempting to achieve the positive outcomes of both. And so when you think about the traditional, people are used to that. That's what we grew up with. Now, depending on who you are listening to this, you might be someone much younger than Tracy and I, or that no, that's not what I've experienced. But there's a lot of people, a lot of baby boomers still in the workforce that this is pretty much how we grew up, was going to work, off to work we go. And so we're very familiar with that. And at the same time, we also want to put our eye on achieving the positive outcomes of that innovation of the hybrid work environment, of the that flexibility that's so important. So we can avoid the negative consequences when we're looking at both.
Yep.
So, like I said, people, leaders are more comfortable and familiar with the in-person, single location. It's what we always knew. And so what happens is our bias can lead towards that as a preference, that we want to go back to work. We want to open the doors. We want to say, okay, everybody, it's time to come back.
Well, and some organizations have demanded their employees come back and employees don't want to do that.
Exactly.
Right? They're liking the flexibility that they get with the hybrid work environment. So we can, make demands, but it could lead to, unwanted, negative outcomes that you really don't want, right? So it's really about how do we get the best of both.
Yeah, and whenever there's tension and resistance, you're probably dealing with a polarity, right?
Yeah, oftentimes it is a polarity. Not every time, but most of the time. Right? So, like we said, this hybrid work environment was birthed out of the necessity of COVID, and it wasn't something maybe organizations chose to do. It was what they had to do. So the goal here is, how do we get the most positive outcomes of this hybrid work environment? How do we get positive outcomes of the in-person, face-to-face connection with each other and work together, and the ability to be remote and to work from home or wherever? And there's positive benefits to both, obviously, or people would not want to be working remotely or in a hybrid situation. So this just requires new ways of thinking, new ways of leading, new approaches, and to recognize that sometimes we have bias. And when we have bias, we have to just know what it is and recognize it, right? And then be open to other perspectives, so we can get a whole, complete picture, and not just focus on what it is that we value, right? So when we're setting out to create a long-term hybrid strategy, you want to consider the outcomes that you want from your current state. Like, what are the best outcomes we can get right now in our current state? And then what are the outcomes we want for our desired future state? So we're always in this transition from where we are today and getting optimal outcomes. And as we transition into the future, what are the optimal outcomes that we want there? And we're always in this transition, right? Moving from one to the next level, from this level to the next level. And so what are those outcomes that we're striving for? And in the hybrid work environment we have today, how can we get the best positive outcomes? And then as we move forward and we get a longer term strategy around hybrid, what is it that we want to move towards and what do we want to experience in the future? And I think, having that polarity lens on the both and of where we are today and getting the most optimal outcomes and being successful in the future with a hybrid work environment as we're creating this strategy and moving towards something that may be greater than it is now. How do we do both, right? How do we do both? And so that's another just kind of a polarity that shows up in here. And it really is about the greater purpose of the hybrid work environment, right? So if we put it in that terms of, if we want a hybrid work environment, then what is the greater purpose of that? And really it is about an empowered, effective, and productive workforce, right? That's what that's the greater purpose of having both in-person and hybrid, right? And so how do we focus our attention there and then create the strategies that will get us the best outcomes of both?
Yeah. And those outcomes will have many layers or many other polarities that are connected to them. So we're going to walk through some of those now, and some of those outcomes, and some of these outcomes came right from that article that Tracy referenced in the beginning. The future of the office has arrived. It's hybrid, and from our own personal experience. So the first one is just let's think about the positive outcomes for the employee. What's the employee's benefit in this hybrid work environment? Well, it does increase work-life balance, right? Just gives you more flexibility to be home while you are working, more efficient use of time. And there's more freedom to choose when and where you will work. You're not confined to the, time you walk in the door to the time that you leave. And less burnout or fatigue at work. Again, because of that flexibility. So there is data on that, and higher productivity. And then also there's organizational benefits to the hybrid work environment. And this is decreased burnout and fatigue of your employees because there's a high cost. When employees are burned out, they leave, they're not as productive. And you're also going to see improved retention of employees as a benefit, greater productivity, and better employee value proposition as well, and larger talent pool to draw from because, again, you're not confined by four walls. You can actually tap that talent pool from across the organization.
Across the world.
Across the world,
in some cases, right? You're not. So many businesses are relying on geographical location, but you don't have to be in the same place.
No.
I work 3,000 miles away from Michelle most of the time.
There's also challenges, though, that can come into place from a hybrid work environment. So it's really, important to be aware of those as well. And from an employee perspective, a challenge is less access to work resources and equipment, right? You can't run down the hall and grab something anymore necessarily or have resources at your fingertips. So there is less access to those things and less connected to organizational culture. So it's different when you're all by yourself in your home office compared to when you're with a lot of people in a work environment. And then also decreased collaboration because there's not as many people around to collaborate with. And impaired working relationships with coworkers is another employee challenge. And reduce cross-functional communication and collaboration. Again, simply because you're not together all the time. You're not even seeing maybe as regularly as you did in a working on site of what people's capabilities are, who you can. We always used to run down the hall and let me just go ask Susie this, or it's not as convenient as it was. And then also there's organizational challenges as well in the hybrid work environment, such as decreased workplace communication. That's probably not as prevalent as it is when we're together in person. Decreased collaboration can have a negative impact on work culture by being isolated and not being together, and lower productivity. And decreased creativity or innovation when you just don't have those other brains to tap on a regular basis.
Well, and I think where we can get into trouble is if we look at these challenges as problems.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Then we can get unipolar in our thinking.
Yeah.
And that can lead to challenges. So that's why it's really important to recognize what are the polarities that are at play here, and that there are some interdependencies, and actually identifying, well, if these are the challenges, then how do we bake these things into our outcomes that we want to achieve? And how do we put action steps in place to achieve those outcomes, right? So that there's better communication, better collaboration, right? Instead of seeing it as a problem and a barrier to success, we could actually see it as a way to create a long-term strategy so we can get the benefits and not have these negative outcomes. So again, it's calls for another way of thinking and looking at it, and we're going to look at it through this lens of polarities, because polarities are universal law. They're everywhere. They're all around us, and not everything is a polarity, but many things are. And if you can't differentiate between a problem and a polarity, then you're going to end up managing that problem over and over and over again because it's not going to be solvable, right? Polarities are ongoing. And so recognizing polarities, but then also complementing that and having conversation, deeper dialogue, and leveraging healthy relationships, which also can help to address some of the challenges that Michelle mentioned that organizations or individuals are experiencing currently, right? When we have healthy relationships and meaningful dialogue, principles that guide us that can make a difference. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is really kind of a new superpower for leaders to leverage, this polarity intelligence, and can really help us to potentially, to not misdiagnose these things as problems, but actually polarities. And then also just helping us to move away from overemphasizing a pole, because that's where our comfort is. And we have a comfort in the in-person work environment. It's what we know. We're familiar with it. We know what the challenges of it are. And when we invite something like this that is so different that we're not used to, we don't know how to lead in that environment. We don't know how to, how to do some of the things to create stronger communication and healthier connections because we've never done it before, right?
Right,
So
right.
it's just some new principles and new ways to step out of that comfort zone and to develop some skill.
Yeah. So we kind of sat back and thought about the whole tradition innovation polarity, but then what are other polarities that are at play here? And so just as we go through these, just kind of think about, is this what I'm experiencing? Because I would say a lot of people are in that hybrid workspace right now. Well, we know they are.
Number of them. Not everybody is hybrid able, right?
Yeah.
Like there are a
There
lot
are
of
some.
people that have to be in their work environment, like nurses, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time you have to
Yeah.
be at the bedside. Now they have some remote nursing.
Yeah, virtual nursing.
But somebody has to be at the bedside.
Yeah. Well, I think the number one that jumped out at us was just structure and flexibility, right? So that is a polarity that needs to be managed in hybrid work environments. So you need to have structure in place, but you also have to have flexibility. So that what I love about polarities, what Tracy loves about polarities, is you determine what that looks like in your situation, but there will be positive outcomes and there will be negative consequences. But to really have successful hybrid work environments, this is one to really maximize.
Yeah, it is. And it can come in a number of different ways, right? And
Yeah.
I think sometimes structure can be how many times do you need to be in the office, right? And how many days do you work from home, right? And that's that flexibility, the ability to have some structure to the engagement of a hybrid work environment, but also the flexibility that's going to bring the most positive results, the outcomes for you.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you have, help your team look at it through that perspective, it's been our experience, they look at it in a different way too. Again, structure and flexibility. The other is just individual competency and team competency. And this polarity really impacts autonomy, collaboration goals. Just because they're hybrid doesn't mean that we don't need each other, right? So it's really helpful to look at this particular polarity when you're looking at maximizing a successful hybrid work environment. And then, of course, productivity and relationships. So you have to be productive in a hybrid work environment, but you also need to maximize relationships. So what does that look like in the context of a hybrid work environment? And again, taking the time with your team to really establish that for your situation so that you really can experience the positive outcomes of both poles and achieve that greater purpose that Tracy mentioned earlier. And then directive and participative decision-making in a hybrid work environment. This is taking a look at what are our policies around this type of a work environment. We have to create some new norms. And there's going to be some tools and methodologies that maybe we haven't used before so that we can really manage directive and participative decision-making differently than we did in just an all-at-work environment. So those are just some of the few key ones that we really think teams and leaders need to be aware of and how to leverage in a hybrid work environment.
Well, and how to set your strategy for the long term, right? And I think that last one's really, really important when you're thinking about creating a hybrid work environment or, developing your strategy to have that really be a part of how the organization operates. You really need that participative decision making because you need those voices. You need to understand that perspective. Right. And I think that just really helps it be a collaborative decision. And then the thing about polarities is they're ongoing. So this is about ongoing evaluation of how effective is this? And we'll talk a little bit more about that so that you can course correct when things aren't working. You make adjustments and you do those things with directive and participative decision making. Right. So it's a both and. And the environment plays such a role when it comes to hybrid. Both when you're together when you're all in the office together and when you've got people that are working remotely. The environment's really, really important. And you are creating a culture and an environment together. Whether you're together all the time or you're not, that's what you're doing, right? And the risks of the hybrid work environment that were noted in the article are like the frayed collaboration, communication, culture, and relationships. So And you can experience those more quickly and more frequently when attention is not given to the culture that's required to promote a strong hybrid work environment. So, again, culture is the expression of who and how we are together, how we operate together, how we behave together. And that whether you're all together in the same physical location or not, you are creating a culture, and it takes great intention, and it has to be paid attention to, especially when you're creating a hybrid work environment and you're creating a strategy to support a successful hybrid environment over time, right? So it is really about what is essential for both on-site and off-site employees and workers, and how we want to be together. What are the components of being polarity intelligent and leveraging healthy relationships and meaningful dialogue and understanding this dynamic and this tension, right? What does that mean to all of us? And healthy relationships are one of the three components of polarity intelligence. And one of the relationship polarities that we are experiencing when we're talking about a hybrid work environment is the transactional and the transformational relationship, right? And there are some things that are transactional, and there are things that really are about how and who we are together, how we're growing and evolving together collectively, that deeper, more meaningful relationship with each other. And so it is both and, right? There are things that we can do that are transactional in delivering outputs to each other, but there's also that how we connect at a human level with each other as well. And so that's kind of a higher overarching polarity, I think, that really comes into play when you're creating a hybrid work environment. And the first thing, I think, the first principle in healthy relationships is being intentional. And I think when it comes to hybrid work environment, this is probably one of the core principles that really has to be leaned into, understood, and facilitated, is that being intentional. You know, if we have challenges with communication and relationships, we have to be very intentional about how we're connecting with each other when we are in a hybrid environment or when we have remote work employees. What are our expectations? How do we connect with each other? How do we bring the humanness into our interactions with each other when we're using video conferencing or phone conferencing, right? It's really about, and it's about each person being intentional and how they're connecting with
absolutely.
others. It's easy to withdraw in a hybrid work environment. It's easy to keep the camera off, right? It's easier to stay in your pajamas and not turn it on, right? So you want to really pay attention to not only, what the intention is of the team, but what's your intention, and in connecting with each other's in relationship. How are you going to maintain relationships and strengthen actually those relationships over time when you're in a hybrid environment? So I think that's just really, really important to pay attention to. Probably one of the key principles when it comes to these in the hybrid. The other is the shared purpose. So again, whether you're in person all the time or you've got some hybrid engagement, focus on the shared purpose. What is it we're here to achieve collectively? That's just really, really important. And then recognizing the equal responsibility towards that shared purpose. So regardless of whether you're in the office all the time or you're coming and going, you're in sometimes and out sometimes, there's a shared purpose and an equal responsibility to that shared purpose. And just keeping that at the forefront of the team at large, I think, can really be helpful when it comes to communication and connecting and some of the challenges that were noted earlier.
Kind of regrounding yourself in that.
Yeah. Another really important principle too is the realizing the human capacity. So again, this is just seeing the potential in each person, tapping into that potential, and keeping that at the forefront as we work together remotely and collaboratively when we're in person. That's always just a great principle for healthy relationships and continuing those relationships, and then balancing relationships with self and others. So again, it's what is your awareness of yourself and how you are showing up in a hybrid work environment, how you are connecting with others, and then how you balance that with your relationship with others as well. So again, just that self-awareness, that connection, being intentional about that is really, really important. And then trustworthiness. And I think this is a big one because people have a sense, we rely on seeing each other And we rely on our visual cues from each other, right, around trustworthiness and integrity and how we're showing up. And when we work in hybrid environments and we're not seeing people, a lot of assumptions can be built up. So this foundation of healthy relationships in a hybrid work environment is really important because we need to be able to trust those when they're not there, that they're being productive, that they're doing the things that they say that they're doing, unless they demonstrate to us otherwise, right? We would want a foundation of trust, and we would want to be trustworthy, right? So we've got to be trustworthy to begin with. And demonstrating that with integrity, right, and showing up in the way that we say we're going to show up and doing the things that we say we're going to do. That's true whether you're in person or not in person, right? It helps to establish that trustworthiness. But I think when we're off camera, it's a little bit harder, right? And that was brought up in the article too. You know, it's a little bit harder to trust somebody when you can't see them. Are they really doing what they say?
What are they doing?
Or are they just like eating bonbons and watching TV, right? Like, so there's that uncertainty, right? And having these principles as a foundation of who and how we are together can help with that trustworthiness as well and help relieve some of those concerns, I think.
Yeah. And then the principles of meaningful dialogue also can help you achieve positive outcomes in the hybrid work environments. And so the first one is really, again, setting that intention and creating psychological safety. And when you're not together physically, it's important when you think about when you're not together, how do you do that? How do you really set that intention and create that psychological safety remotely? So you have to be intentional about that and to communicate that with others, what your intention is. And then listening and being aware. So again, you may not be able to see everyone, their whole physical body in a hybrid work environment. But you can start to hone those skills of paying attention over a camera or on Teams or the different tools that you use, and suspending any assumptions that you may have so that you can really be aware, be present, and listen to what is being said. And then balancing advocacy and inquiry. So it's really important just to bring that forward in a hybrid work environment as well. So if you're uncertain about something, ask a question just to make sure you're not making an assumption. Or again, sharing your perspective of even the work environment, just getting your perspective out there so that you are having that meaningful conversation and communication while you are working together. Those are critical communication skills, whether you're in person or you're looking at each other over a camera. Leveraging candor and diplomacy. So speaking honestly and open with each other and asking for what you need are really important as well in the hybrid work environment. And giving each other space to say what you need is important. And then inviting silence and reflection. Sometimes it's okay just to be silent as a team together remotely as well, and just creating that space. And sometimes we even start our meetings with we don't say anything for a while. We just kind of are together. That environment that you spoke of, Tracy, is we don't always have to all be talking at the same time. And certainly when you're remote, you have to find those different ways where you can sit in the silence and make sure you create that reflection for each other before you jump into a conversation with each other.
Well, and I think too, when you're learning to work in a hybrid environment, maybe you're not used to working outside of the workplace, right? Outside of a physical location. I think it's important to do your own reflection and to be silent and to think about how am I handling this?
Yeah.
Am I showing up the best way that I can? What am I learning about this? It's not always easy. I mean, there are benefits to structure. There are benefits to 9 to 5. While there are, it gives that structure to when you start work and when you stop work. So I think it's really important for you to pay attention to yourself. And what you're learning and as well, right? So that silence and reflection individually is equally important, I think, especially as you're transitioning into this kind of work engagement.
Yeah, it really is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the environment is important whether employees are together or remote. I think it just challenges to think about work environment. It's much bigger than what it has ever been before. So just put it within that context. And just being together doesn't create a culture or improve productivity either. It must be intentional in both spaces. And to leverage in-person time to maximize the outcomes is really helpful. Some people are maybe very used to working remote, and they're uncomfortable when they have to walk back in the door.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah,
It goes both ways, right?
Well, and if you're going to require people to be in the office, then make it the most that you can. Like if collaboration is what you're after by having people be in the office a certain amount of time, then capitalize on that togetherness. Like get as much out of it as you can, so that they feel that time spent together is effective and productive, and that they're getting out of it what they would expect to get out of it by being in person, right?
Yeah.
Doing the same things when you're in person as you do when you're remote does not influence people positively to want to come into the work environment.
I could have done this. I could have been at home for this.
Right, exactly, because they have to travel in, right? And so you want to really be intentional, and that was in the article as well. You want to make sure that what the experience that they're having in person is worth the effort to be there,
Makes
and that
total sense.
you're getting that outcome that you want from the in-person engagement. Yeah, it's really important. Really important.
So it's all about establishing that culture that is going to really thrive in a hybrid work environment and coming up with your norms. And it's certainly what we know is applying a polarity intelligence perspective to it will really help people understand, grow in it, know how to manage the polarities, find different ways to have meaningful conversations in a hybrid work environment, and continue to foster and grow those healthy relationships. And then whatever you decide, in your culture, what your norms are going to be, then it's really important to hold people accountable to that as well, so that you can continue to foster and experience that healthy work culture in a hybrid format. So when a new hybrid norm is being established, it's also important to continue to experiment, study the effectiveness, adjust, do those course corrections along the way. Because things will change, different things will happen, but you're always course correcting as well. Mm-hmm. And a good way to do that is to actually do a polarity assessment. To how well are you managing those crux polarities? How well are you managing the polarities that you set for your business objectives? So you can actually measure those over time. And it's a perfect way to do that. And it really helps because you get everyone's perspectives. Whether you're in person or remote, you can get everyone's perspectives on those polarities and tensions and actually measure the impact of their interdependencies, which then allows you to be strategic about it. What are the action steps we need to take to continue to have a healthy, thriving work culture in a hybrid work environment?
Well, and I think if you're looking at things like productivity and relationships, right, it gives you that opportunity. Are we getting the outcomes of the productivity that we really want to get? And are we getting the outcomes of the relationships? If our relationships are a challenge, what are the outcomes from a relationship perspective that you want? And are those action steps really effective? Right. So there are some of those core polarities that you could really leverage and manage and measure over time. And I think the other thing around the polarity assessment, there's a very specific tool that is web-based that you can use for that. And it is real time. So you can measure that at over time and real time. And we know that polarities are ongoing. So you can measure it to start with, how are we doing? Then as you implement things, you can measure again. And so there's lots of information that can provide you and give you the opportunity to course correct. And when you're experiencing those negative consequences, it really is a great mechanism for understanding what went wrong. What action step maybe wasn't effective? What did we drop the ball on? Is there something we're not doing? Is there something we thought would be effective, but it isn't effective, right? So it gives you a lot more awareness and opportunity, I think, for that course correction that Michelle was talking about. And I think, for us, we work in a remote work environment. Like we said, it's kind of a hybrid. We come together. We've been together for the last 2 weeks. working together really closely. And then there will be times where we're apart for a month or more.
Yeah, month or more, yeah.
Right. And so we've had to manage a lot of this. And all of the people that work with us all work remote. We have people that work in other countries that work with us as well. Right. So we have been working to establish a culture. Really, really important to have a culture that is supportive of everybody contributing what it is that they are here to contribute, and at the same time stay connected, be in relationship, right? So we're fostering that productivity and that relationship. We leverage structure and flexibility, a lot of structure and flexibility too, right?
We leverage tools, and we leverage different things to really make it all come together.
We do. Yeah. And so it's just, you have to be really aware. And we do a lot of video conferencing, right?
Yep,
a lot of video conferencing. But then we also are very aware, and we know when we need to come together. And we watch for the warning signs when we've been overemphasizing. It's really easy to slip into silo work and individual work when you have certain responsibilities and you're working remotely. It's really easy to slip into overemphasizing that, right? And neglecting to bring in the other team, because you can just do it. I'm just going to get this done, right? So there's a lot of things to pay attention to individually, and then I think collectively as well has been a lot of our experience with that. And there's ups and downs, but having the healthy relationships and knowing how to engage in meaningful dialogue around what we are experiencing, what's working and what's not working. And kind of every quarter, we look at our core polarities that guide our organization, that guide the culture that we're creating. And we evaluate, how are we doing? Are we experiencing any negative consequences? What do we need to do to course correct? And then we come together in meaningful dialogue around that to course correct when we need to.
Right.
Yeah, so we're always watching it.
Always watching it. Always watching it. So, some call to action for you. If we have a lot of these examples, well, not so much for hybrid work environment now that I think about it,
but for polarities.
But yeah, and a lot of things that are connected to the things we talked about today in our book, The Polarity Intelligence, The Missing Logic in Leadership. So if you haven't already purchased it, please do, because a lot of all the principles are in there, and there's also some different examples. And we really challenge you to look at this through a polarity intelligence lens, the whole hybrid work environment. It'll give you the fundamental understanding of all the principles that we talked about today.
Yep. And we do have an example in there in the chapter 7 for monitoring and measuring polarities at the Center for Creative Leadership. It was 2017, so quite a long time ago. They looked at team effectiveness across virtual teams, and they used a polarity assessment to monitor 8 different polarities. I think they looked at. The focus wasn't necessarily on virtual as much as it was virtual teamwork. So, but again, just an example in the book of how you can leverage polarities and how you can look at polarities and have polarities guide you in what you're doing when it comes to working virtually or in virtual teams. And, if this is something that you're attempting to do, if you're trying to create a long-term strategy, if you are having any struggles in a hybrid work environment, we'd love to chat with you. You can go out to our website, missinglogic.com, and just reach out to us and schedule a 30-minute consultation call. We're happy to learn a little bit more about your organization, what you're experiencing, what it is that you want to achieve, and have further dialogue with you around how we might be able to support you leveraging polarity intelligence. I think that is it for today. I think that was a lot.
It was. We packed a lot in this one.
We packed a lot in there. It's really exciting. I love what's happening, and I love looking at things through this polarity intelligence lens, because it can make such a difference for the experience that people have and the outcomes that they get, right? When you're looking for sustainable, positive outcomes, you've got to look at the polarities. So thank you, listeners, for being there, for listening to us today. We appreciate you so much. We're so grateful that you tune in, and And we've just been hearing a lot from our listeners lately about how much they're getting out of the podcast. So thank you for that feedback. And if you liked what you heard today, please share it with other people. That helps us to grow the podcast itself and get a larger reach, have more impact. And please leave a review. Let us know when you're getting, getting something out of the episodes that we have.
Yeah.
We love getting the feedback. It just makes our heart sing when we hear how meaningful it is to you and that you feel like we're speaking to you. We love that. And subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. That's the most important thing, right? And then if you prefer video, we do have a YouTube channel, and you can watch us on YouTube. I think we show up pretty well on the YouTube channel, so you can check us out in our studio. And I think that's a wrap for today. So thank you again for being here, and take care, stay healthy, and we will see you next time, or we'll talk to you next time.
Have a great week.